Are you new to the board gaming hobby and you have no idea what to buy? Well, I got you. I was in your shoes not too many years ago, and I bought a ton of games that I don't quite play today. And even since then, there have been even better versions that fit in a similar slot that I now would much prefer to play. So I'm going to share my breadth of knowledge with you. And in this video, we're going to go over 9 games that are commonly recommended and you might already have in your collection or are thinking about buying. But most importantly, we're going to be going over 9 other alternative games that I think are actually better for a beginner, and some of which you can actually grow into over time. One of the first small box card games that I got, it was heavily recommended to me, and frankly is a great game. It's Arboretum. Arboretum is a clever little tableau building game. You're trying to build paths of trees and score them at the end of the game. There's a tricky little mechanism that allows you to only score the trees where you have the highest value of that type of tree left in your hand by the end of the game. It's also a lot of kind of sneaky take that. I'm not saying to not go play Arboretum. I'm just saying Forest Shuffle is a better tableau building, nature themed game where you do play trees down and score them. However, Forest Shuffle has so much more depth in scoring. You are playing trees into your tableau, as well as tucking cards below it, above it, to the left of them, to the right of them. You're building these trees out. You're planting plants down below them, or having birds live in the top of them, or tucking deer or wolves. There's so many different types of animals and plants and birds and mushrooms, all kinds of stuff that you tuck behind these trees with many different scoring conditions. There's all kinds of different symbols that interact with each other. You have to discard cards to play cards. The fun part there is you're discarding them into the middle of the table, very similar to an Arboretum mechanic, and the other player then has a chance to be able to draft those into their hand. This thing continues to live on in my household. We continue to play it. There's 2 expansions out now that I really enjoy quite a bit. This is one of the few games I'm recommending that I've not done a video on. I probably should do a video at this point, especially since there's already been 2 expansions out, because it's just a spectacular little card game. It's a super easy game to play. You just play cards down, pay their cost in cards, or draft cards or draw them from the deck. That is basically it. The hand management is absolutely beautiful. There are so many different possibilities and strategies. It's a dynamic game that kind of reveals itself over time. Any new player can play this. I can play this with absolutely anyone. I've played it so many times and I am not bored of it. So that's why I think it's a great early tableau building game you can get your hands on, and something that you can kind of grow into, add expansions to. Probably a little bit better of an investment than going and buying Arboretum in my mind. Next up, we're starting with a classic game here. It's Agricola, Uwe Rosenberg's classic. Some may argue that Cavern is a little bit better, but it's that classic Euro farmy worker placement game, a game that I got super early on in my board gaming career. Got it to the table. I actually liked it. It was probably one of the heavier games I had ever played up until that point, but that combined with the aesthetic really turned my wife off. She didn't like it. We weren't really used to kind of heavier games. Since then, we've played much heavier, but for a beginner, I think it's a little bit of a stretch. I think the mechanics are, a little bit obtuse as compared to some of the more sleeker designs that we have now. And what I'm going to actually suggest instead is significantly less complicated, and it's Harvest. Harvest I reviewed earlier this year, and it was one of the biggest surprises, if not the biggest surprise for me in 2024 of all board games I played. When you take one look at Harvest, you see pretty beautiful, bright, vibrant game, also about planting crops and farms. However, the aesthetic, it almost comes off as childish. It might lead you to believe that this, what is a very simple rule set, leads to really simple gameplay. And I can tell you, it is a very basic worker placement game. You place a wheelbarrow and you take an action. However, you also have this polyomino puzzle that you're going to be playing out on your own board. You are going to be removing forests, building buildings. Those buildings give you immediate benefits or endgame scoring. The decisions of your wheelbarrow placement out on the board are really crunchy. You are buying seeds, planting seeds, watering them, and then harvesting them eventually for more and more money or points. There's a couple fun little modules that go on in this game, including some asymmetric powers. On its surface, it is a really simple rule set, a much shorter game as compared to, I believe, the 14 rounds in Agricola, a much more beautiful game, and just, it's a game I would bring out to any newcomer to the hobby, but also still have fun playing. If you want to know more about Harvest, go watch my full review because I go over all of this stuff in depth. Just know if you're looking for worker placement farming, that's the one I recommend for you. One of the first tile placement games that I got was Calico. We love cats, and this really fit kind of an aesthetic that my wife enjoyed. Very early on, I was trying to do everything I could to bring her into the hobby and get her excited about it because it was something I was excited about. Many people, for good reason, had mentioned Calico as a great, crunchy tile laying game, and that it is. It's beautiful. It's brain burning. You're building out a patchwork quilt. The patches have to be in the right space to score the most points. There's a decent amount that goes into it. However, much later on, in fact, relatively recently, I played Cascadia for the first time, and Cascadia is spectacular. You're drafting tiles and the accompanying tokens. You're placing those tiles into a tableau as well as the tokens. The tokens represent animals. You're scoring based upon adjacency in these tiles, trying to build out these ecosystems, as well as get the right animals adjacent to the other right animals. There's lots of different scoring conditions, and they change every game as you kind of randomly deal out those scoring milestones. But the sheer simplicity of this game, I can play with absolutely anyone. The variable goals keep it fresh as you play. As you build out the tableau in front of you, you can expand it into any direction. You're not stuck trying to fit it all in one teeny tiny board with a ton of constraints around it, which some people might like. For a new player, it might be a little bit brain burny for them. You have almost a sandbox in front of you with Cascadia to do what you want. It's just a really fun dynamic puzzle that's constantly changing that I feel will grow with the player a little bit more than Calico. And if you want to hear more about Calico and how it even beats Harmonies, which is another new tile-ish placement game, which also is a competitor for this slot, go check out my video there. I actually bought Sleeping Gods very early on because I needed a open world narrative type game. I had heard that the story was so unbelievable. The art really drew me. I mean, look at that cover. This cover is amazing. It's so cool. The drama that is implied by that monster under the boat had me buy it regardless. Then I tried to learn it. I played the first scenario and I kind of bounced off of it. Fast forward to actually fairly recently, and I do have a video for this one, which isn't my recommendation. It's Sleeping Gods Distant Skies. Very similar game that is streamlined in a pretty big way. It is an easier thing to table, and I thought it was really spectacular. Relative to the first, it's easy to table. It still would be really overwhelming as especially a very first kind of narrative driven game. Lucky for you, Red Raven also came out with Sleeping Gods Primeval Peril. And Primeval Peril is kind of an adventure on rail. Instead of this open world, you're going up and down this river system and interacting with the world very much like you do in the other Sleeping Gods games. The battle is wonderful, like in Distant Skies. It is a much more approachable entry into the series, and one in which is a little bit of a lower stake entry. So you get this less expensive game that is shorter, much less broad and overwhelming. The systems being streamlined helped you get into it and out of it much easier. And if you like it, I would highly, highly, highly recommend going to Distant Skies, because Distant Skies has just been spectacular. That's one that's still sitting in my collection. I've got a couple campaigns down and it has replayability. Primeval Peril, I think, has a little bit less replayability. Since then, some people have made some cases that maybe the replayability is a little bit better than I had given it credit for. Regardless, it's certainly less than something like the bigger brother or sister in Sleeping Gods #1 and Distant Skies. But I will say the story is still just as immersive. You're trying to figure out a mystery. There's still plenty to explore and figure out here. There's tons of fun little things that happen that I'd love to spoil for you to give you a better idea of this game. But just know, if you're looking for a narrative experience that is sort of open / sort of on rails, and maybe you don't want to make the jump to the big brother and sister of the other two sleeping gods, definitely try out Primeval Peril. It is a great game. All right, I really like this one. And the first game we're going to talk about, I know you've had recommended to you. You might already have it. In fact, this was the second game I purchased after Wingspan, because it was another beautiful production in a genre I had never played before, which is worker placement. And that game is Everdell. Everdell is a worker placement tableau building game. You have a strict number of cards you can play out in front of you. I say strict, there are some ways to get around that, but regardless, basically what you're trying to do is place workers, gather resources, play these cards to your tableau, and score as many points as possible relative to the cards, right? I think it's a great little puzzle. Since then, Everdell has been expanded a million different ways. I have the giant big box that has everything in it. And this is probably another video, one in which I mentioned before, there's just too much and I can't even get that thing out. Good thing for me this year, which was my game of the year, Wondrous Creatures came out. If you've played Life of Amazonia, this is from the same publisher, and I loved it. It reminded me so much of Everdell, but just a little bit better everywhere. You place your workers or these animals and activate hexes around you, gather resources, grab cards, play cards to a tableau. It's not a strict tableau. You're basically just playing cards out in front of you that do all kinds of different things, score in all kinds of different ways, activate in so many different ways to get you more resources or cards, interact with each other. It is this really great puzzle that I just enjoy to play over and over and over again. There's also some little expansions that you can get that I think, depending on which I probably need to do another video on, really add a lot to the game. I think Everdell might compete a little bit once you add the different expansions onto it. But the big question is, which ones do you buy? Which ones do you add on? Do you play with multiple? Wondrous Creatures out of the box is just a wonderful game. In my mind, it felt less restrictive. The sky is the limit on the tableau that I'm building. Seeing what cards come up is really, really fun. There's no constraint on the number of rounds. As soon as all the trophies are collected, the game is going to end. It just felt less constraining overall, and I didn't feel like I had to add anything else to it to make it interesting. Everdell was great in the beginning. I kind of got bored of it. I certainly like some of the expansions. It's still probably a good game to play, but Wondrous Creatures, I think, is just a little bit better, if not a lot, depending on who you are. One in which, now that it has come out, I am definitely recommending it over Everdell as your worker placement tableau building game. This next game that I'm recommending actually came out again this year and took over the spot of Spirit Island, not as the best game in this particular genre, but as I think a much better game to start with, frankly. Spirit Island is a hand management cascading failure, heavily asymmetric, spirits trying to kick invaders off of your island. Incredible theme. Subjectively, the artwork is wonderful. The card play is great, but it is so damn complicated. I got this really early on in my journey, and I don't regret it. I definitely don't regret it. It just was really tough for a new player to table, to really wrap my head around everything. And I think Defenders of the Wild, for a new player, definitely gives you some of those feelings. In Defenders of the Wild, you're now cute woodland creatures trying to beat off this mechanical force that's trying to take over the woodland. It's another cascading failure game. It's another one that feels very much like Spirit Island without a lot of the complexity. You are playing different factions. It is cooperative as well. The bots are incredibly easy to run. It's just I thought a really great entry point to this kind of co-op or even solo cascading failure genre of trying to save the natural environment against an invading force. This thing brings the crunchy decisions. It brings the tension of your woodland being completely overran by this mechanical robot force without all of the complexity. Now, with that said, if you play this and you like it, Spirit Island is a really spectacular game and is one of my favorite games of all time and is a better game subjectively, I would say objectively, than Defenders of the Wild. However, if you're starting out with this hobby, Defenders of the Wild is the one to go with. There's no reason to rush to Spirit Island. It will always be there. Defenders of the Wild just came out this year. It is highly underrated and one in which I would really suggest anyone try. This one is a tough one. I actually became really enamored with this hobby. Like I had mentioned Wingspan, and Wingspan led me to watching a video of Elizabeth Hargrave, the designer, interview with Quackalope. That then my algorithm took over, and Quackalope was really into Root at the time. And I just watched a ton of Root, and I got so enamored with it, but never really found the group until recently. And Root is, like Spirit Island, a better game objectively than my recommendation. One in which is one of my absolute favorite games of all time, but not one I'm going to recommend you as a beginner, because you really need a group. It's just like in Spirit Island, asymmetry, meaning every faction you play is completely different and really difficult, frankly, to pick up for a new player. With that said, good news, the people over at Leader Games made an alternative for you. And this is another one I think is kind of slept on pretty often. And if Root is pulling at you at all, try Ahoy first. Ahoy has asymmetry, but it plays at lower player counts. The asymmetry is significantly more simple. You are slowly exploring an ocean board that reveals itself over time. It mixes area control, tactical movement, very much like Root, well, at least in the same kind of general mechanics as Root, without all of the extra complexity, without the million different factions to learn. There's two main factions in the Bluefin Squadron and Mollusk Union. There's also two smugglers that can be played at 3 and 4 player games. This game initially was just going to stay with these factions. It has since been expanded, or at least yet to deliver. It has expansions with some really fun things that you can add on. This game will still grow with you, just like a game like Root. However, it doesn't have that complexity. It's a nicely contained, relatively small box game that if you want the taste of asymmetry, area control, variable powers, a fun ocean faring theme, Ahoy might be the one that you want to try out. The next one was recommended right out of the gates. I played Lost Ruins of Arnak very early, and it's a hybrid between deck building and worker placement. But if I liked deck building, many people outside of maybe Dominion said Clank. Clank was the deck builder, and I love Clank. It is a deck building game where you independently are trying to go through a dungeon, collect treasure, and get out of there before the dragon attacks and kills you. It's competitive. You all are trying to collect the treasure with the most points. There's lots of different modifiers and different fun little tokens to go and collect, fun little modules to interact with. And I've liked it for a long time. However, I recently got my hands on Clank Catacombs, and I think it's just a better game. You look on BGG, it's already, I believe, already passed its ranking. Its ratings are through the roof. One of the big differences here are the tiles are explorable. You don't see the entire dungeon out in front of you. You can't really map out all of your moves from the very beginning. It is dynamic. You're going to go off into a direction and maybe get stuck. Somebody else exposes a tile on the totally different side of the board, and you really need the thing there, and you got to go all the way over to the other side. There's also little fun modules and rooms to deal with. I just think it's a more dynamic, better version of a deck builder that I really, really enjoy. I think it gives you more replayability with the tiles, more tension because of the tiles that are being exposed over time, and really gives you the feeling of exploring a dungeon instead of looking at a dungeon in front of you and thinking, how do I get from point A to point B? The core rules are the same as Clank. There's not a bunch of other rules overhead. There's some new modules that are kind of sprinkled in there. They're easy enough to learn how to interact with them. It is the Clank formula, just in a better version. So if you are new and thinking about Clank, skip it, go straight to Clank Catacombs. You'll thank me for it because you don't need both. All right, last up. The one I'm going to talk about is really can be a proxy for any racing game. I think the most popular recommendation for a racing game right this second is probably Heat. Heat's the newest of all of them. I actually started with Cubitos. I moved on to Heat, and I don't know. I have a video out there where I compare it to Candyland. It just felt really linear. I've had plenty of people that argued against me, and I probably need to try it again, especially with, which I think there's 2 new expansions. But it just seemed like a lot to do for a really simple puzzle, really. I'm not going to go too much into Heat. I don't want to kill Heat. However, what I do know is very recently I played a classic, which is arguably probably the one racing game that is actually recommended more. I just wanted to throw Heat under the bus for a little bit, but Quest for El Dorado is another deck building game. If you love deck building, Quest for El Dorado is a great, pure deck builder. But basically what you're doing is you are racing through a forest with what is pretty simple cards, trying to make it through different terrains based upon the cards that you're playing and make it to the end first. There's some other fun, more advanced cards that you can buy and play, but it's just the way the map is set up and the variable different directions you can go in. All of them cost different cards to get through. So you're really kind of, it's a push your luck system that isn't linear in nature. You really can go in a bunch of different directions and still get to the end. It just depends on if you draw the right cards at the right time and if you've built your deck correctly to be able to get through that specific terrain. I really do need to do a video on Quest for El Dorado because I played this one time and I thought, why on earth have I not been playing this thing for years? It is a spectacular, just wonderful entry-level deck building racing game that I kicked myself in the butt for buying Cubitos and buying Heat. I would have just been much better off starting off with probably the champion in this genre, Quest for El Dorado. And that is it. That is the 9 games I recommend to every single beginner. Many of these are actually on BGA and you can go play them for free right this second. So you don't even have to waste the money on going to see if you like them. Go to BGA right this second and play them. By the way, I'll play with any of you. If you want to play any of these games in BGA, hit me up in the comments, or most importantly, go to the Discord that is linked down below. Join our cardboard club. It's completely free. We have a really great community that is, I don't know, it's bubbling up. I guess that's the wrong word. It's festering. No, that's not it either. It's really growing into something kind of cool, and I really love the people in there. So if you want to play games, any of these, or really any games with me, come check out the Cardboard Club. I'd love to see you there. And with all of that said, if you made it this far, thank you very much. Have yourself a great day.